overtime right now. I just wanted to let everyone know that I'm going to have to leave our session earlier because of another commitment that I have. And periodically we all run into these types of situations. So I will let you know about 11:15. I have to leave. So, and I mentioned this to Ruth Ann. Well, I don't know if we've heard, Ruth Ann, have we heard anything? Will the rabbis be here to continue the discussions?
Norm said he's running a little late.
Okay, so maybe we'll overlap. Okay, okay. Anyway, let's get started.
I have to leave around 11:30. I have an appointment with the vet for my cat. So.
Okay, that's an important visit. Okay, so we just have to roll with the punches, so to speak. Anyway, let me read our opening prayer, and then I'm going to turn it over to David to do our weekly reading. I'll read it in English this week. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe. You have sanctified us through your commandments and commanded us to busy ourselves in things of Torah. Amen. David?
Okay, good morning, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom. Today's quotation will be from William Blake, The Auguries of Innocence, which he wrote in 1803. To see the world in a grain of sand, and the heaven in a wild flower. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. Thank you.
Very, very profound. Very profound. It is, we speak of, in Torah, they speak of, that we will, when God speaks with Abraham, he's told that he will be, his progeny will be more than the grains of sand. So it's a very important concept, what David just read, and it ties in very much with what we discuss. As a child, did you ever hold sand in your hand?
Oh yeah, I think all of us did. That's something that was.
And did you imagine, like in Torah, the stars? Or the grains of sand?
No, I did not. Not until I read William Blake when I was a kid.
Interesting. But it's an amazing thing when you look at it.
Over here.
All I can say is that this phrase reminds me of so much. A lot is said about detail. It's detail that makes a diagnosis in medicine. It's detail that makes an astronomer seeing a comet for the first time. Okay.
It's the details that make music special.
Exactly. For artists, for writers, no matter what, it's the details that matter. Recommendation: next time you walk through the temple garden, or any garden for that matter, study an insect in detail. Study a blade of grass or a leaf in detail. Study the bark of a tree or a bush in detail and see how they differ from one to another. And all of a sudden you'll realize it's all working together. Okay? Without one, another fails. That's also in Torah. Yes, Michael.
Yeah, just to continue with my thought about the music, it's the details that create an arrangement, a new arrangement of a piece of music. And those details have become obvious to people who have a kind of an ear for music, but they still recognize the piece of music.
Right. And this is, so when we see things, think about it. We do this all the time in our studies. When we take apart and study a letter or a word, we are doing the same thing. We are looking at details, and it makes us think of so many different variations that come to our mind. And I think that that is why Amy has said this is a different type of Torah study, because we're doing that very thing. And I just wanted to point that out. And thank you, Amy, for your previous comments. Anyway, what I decided to do is to start today with Exodus 22, verse 9. And we have been speaking about animals, and we've been speaking about grain. So we are in, and all of these, if you will, whether we look at them as commandments, laws, or rules, deals with ethical behavior, and it's all interconnected. Okay. So if somebody would care to read from verse 9.
When a man,
9 through 12.
9 through 12, when a man gives to another an ass, an ox, a sheep, or any other animal to guard, and it dies or injured or is carried off with no witness about, an oath before the Lord shall decide between the two of them that the one has not laid hands on that property of the other. The owner must acquiesce, and no restriction shall be made.
Restitution, payment.
Restitution shall be made. Continue.
Sure, please, through the end of verse 12.
Okay, but if the animal was stolen from him, he shall make restitution to its owner. If it was torn by beasts, he shall bring it to as evidence, as he need not replace what has been torn by beasts.
Okay. Any comments about this? Is it, if it's, let us say, somebody asks you to mind their pet, okay, and certain of these events happen. Let's say the animal becomes ill while you're taking care of the animal. Is it your responsibility to look after that animal and to take it to a vet? Yes, David.
I believe. In fact, we've had a lot of
David, you're fading in and out. Something with your sound.
a lot of experience with that. We've often taken care of a neighbor.
We still have the same issue, David.
Okay, is this any better?
Oh, much better, much better.
Okay, we have a lot of experience with this. If an animal, if our neighbor's pet should become ill, we take the pet to the vet. Hasn't happened yet, but the procedures are in place. If we ever are taking care of a neighbor's animal and the animal should become ill in any way, we are told which vet to take it through, and it's all planned ahead of. So yes.
Okay, and Michael said yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
Marty, could you please repeat that question you asked, please?
Okay, well, what happens if somebody asks you to take care of their pet? And while you are taking care of the pet, the animal becomes ill. Is it your responsibility to take care of that animal?
Yes, it is.
And that's what you said. That's right.
Yeah, the person asks you to take care of the animal, and if you agree to that,
Oh, of
once
course.
once you agree to take it, then you take possession, and at that time you become responsible.
Right. The word is responsibility. You
Yeah,
assume
you
responsibility.
become responsible, and you assume that responsibility. And
Right.
it's pretty clear. If it's really a matter of a I would say good common sense.
Very good.
And it applies today. So therefore, once you take charge, and it could be anything, and applies today, you'd have to take great care. And if it's an animal or a person, and you're watching over, you have the responsibility to call a doctor, call an ambulance, or take the animal and take care of it. That's taking care of it. That's the responsibility there.
Thank you. Very, very well stated. Yes, Don.
I can relate to that very directly because last week I adopted 2 elderly cats from the shelter, which were turned in by a Jewish man, actually, because he said his life circumstances had changed. So I adopted these cats, got them home, and realized they were not well. And so I took them to the vet a couple of days ago, and it looks like they have, typical elderly cat ailments, kidneys, liver, the usual thing. So now I'm faced with the decision whether to, exactly as we're reading now in the Torah, whether I have assumed responsibility for these 2 old cats, and taken that responsibility from the previous owner, who apparently wasn't willing to continue their maintenance. So as of this morning, I'm taking them back. So I've made a decision that, okay, I decided to take on these 2 cats. So I made that decision, so I'll stick with it. But this is directly, I think, relevant to what we're reading right this moment.
It can be. Is the other person being made aware that the cats are ill?
I have no doubt he knew that, and that was the main reason he turned them in.
Okay. Because, it's one of those things, as long as that goes along with the sense of responsibility, I think, because it's a very important concern. Hi, Rabbi.
Good morning. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos. So I think that there's a lot of discussion here. Now, here's a question. Why do you think it is important to understand that sense of responsibility that comes along with either borrowing, lending, the care of someone's animal? Why is that so important? Why is it being spelled out here? Take a guess. Take a guess. Yes, Michael. Michael, Amy had her hand up.
Okay.
First. Please, Amy, please.
Well, it's an issue of trust. If you have, like I had a pet tortoise and I went away on vacation for a week, and my neighbor watched my tortoise. But when I got back, the tortoise was gone. And my neighbor had taken every precaution, put out water, put out food, everything. But we think maybe a dog had come up into her area where the tortoise was and had probably taken it, or it had wandered off. It was not her responsibility. She felt terrible for it. But when you have something that you value and you lend it to someone or entrust them with it, they have an obligation, a responsibility to give it all the care that you would have.
Okay. Is it there just for the animals?
No, it's any item.
Any item? So it's
Yes.
for items and animals. Going to raise I'm just going to ask a question. I'll put it in this sense. Suppose you hire a babysitter. Suppose you leave your children in the care of someone else, or maybe another family member. I'm just raising that question because if you can do it with items and animals, shouldn't you expect the same in humans?
Of course.
Well, maybe that's part of the lesson. Yes, Don.
Yeah, Marty, I'm not so sure about that. At times we're reading this, we're reading the animals are property, domesticated animals are property, just same as women and children were. So it seems to me that these laws are based on property transactions and the typical kinds of things that pop up because animals are prone to injury. I mean, if they had Maseratis at the same time, we probably might be reading about loaning out a Maserati to your neighbor.
Okay, that makes sense. However, if we look at women and children as they did at that time as property, chattel, wouldn't we want to at least look at humans with the same humanity that we would extend to other animals? Okay, David, I think that's a Wendy hand and then Michael.
Oh,
David, was that Wendy who wanted to ask a question?
I'm muted.
You're maybe, yeah, you're muted, David.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very clearly.
Okay. When David and I first moved in here and we met our neighbors, they had a girl in the 4th grade and a boy in the 3rd grade, and we had 3 dogs. And I said, David, this is great. We've got kids next door. And he said, what do you mean? I said, because they can be taught. You tell them what they need to do, show them the whole way, and they will take care of the animals better than anybody else. And they did. We put a common gate between our yards, and every day, 3 times a day, they came in, fed them, played with them. And by the time they grew up, the son, who did not go to college, learning that sense of responsibility, got a job as a handyman, like at one of the local apartment buildings, and is now doing very well. And his dad said, thank you. Everything you did has taught Doug how to be responsible. And that's where it starts, with something little.
Okay. But yes, okay. Thank you, Wendy. Very good. Very good.
I think I was going to say something along those lines. When we're talking about the sense of being responsible for something, it starts out at a kind of a lower on the ladder. You take care of an item, like Amy said, an item. You'll be responsible for that, and then an animal, you're responsible, and then when you get to a human being, you have learned of that sense of responsibility, and although taking care of an animal is very important, taking care of it with your what you said about a babysitter. Now you're taking care of somebody's children. This is a very, very high sense of responsibility, but it all boils down to the word responsibility. It really
That's
has
right.
a place there. And one other thing, I would like to get into a little bit of discussion between a commandment and a law. The difference between a commandment and a law.
Okay.
Because I see, when we talked about the 10 Commandments, they're not, I brought up the fact they're not clear cut. They can be adjusted, just like a law can. But when God commands something, that's it. Or is it?
Good
You know what I
question.
mean? Yeah, okay.
That would take 2 hours of discussion.
Sorry for that.
No, that's okay. But no, I think that maybe these, when we speak of King Solomon, okay, here you have two women arguing over a child, and King Solomon is doing the same thing. Who has the higher level of responsibility towards that child? And so to save the life of a child, one of the women says, go ahead, take the child. And King Solomon says, that's good. So the responsibility is there. And, for the life of the child, but it's also a responsibility towards people. All of these decisions in the law deal with people. Quite often we forget that. And I think that's here. It's an extension of this. If we can have a sense of responsible things to inanimate objects, and if we can have a sense of responsibility to living things, whether it's plant or animal, don't we also have a sense of responsibility to each other? Yes, Rabbi. And welcome.
Thanks. My apologies for being a little delayed. And incidentally, before I get in, because there are two things that I want to talk about, but I wanted the group to know, one, Helene Fields had been in the hospital.
Yes.
She's home, and she wants everyone to know that she's thinking of it and appreciates the thought, but don't everybody or any start to call her, because she
Right.
really needs her rest. The other is that Pastor Bruce suffered the loss. I forget if it's brother-in-law or sister-in-law, and he has to go up to Oregon to be with the rest of the family. So his apologies for that, for his not being with us today. And probably next week also. So two things. One comment about Michael's question, and then a little bit of a personal anecdote. One of the differences that Jewish tradition, as I understand it, talks about between the commandment and a law. It is obviously the origin of them are different. The commandment we talk about in our tradition comes from God, whereas the law comes from societal need. And with very few exceptions, they're very clear cut, but with very few exceptions, Jewish tradition says follow the law first, even if it supersedes the commandments, except in 4 cases. And I'm not, like Marty said, that could be a 2-hour discussion. But Jewish tradition is very clear. If there's tension between a civil law and a commandment, you follow the law, except in 3 or 4 cases. All right. The other thing that I wanted to just, when you got into talking about babysitter and responsibility, I'm not sure how initially you got there, but back in the earlier days, not only when I was a younger father, and also that many years ago, 30 years ago, whatever, in my rabbinate back up in Michigan, I was having a conversation with some of the bar bat mitzvah kids, and one of them said something and said, you know, my parents or my next door neighbors, whatever, asked me to babysit, and I'm not sure that I feel confident to take that responsibility. So we were talking about it a little bit more. We talked about what kind of scenarios that they could encounter and how to do it and whatever. And the thought occurred to me, and I talked to some of the educators at the local middle school, junior high school, and we actually developed a course, like a 6-week, 6-session babysitter training course, with the hook being that you could tell your employers that you've taken this, you have this certification, and so they should pay you more than somebody who doesn't have the certification. They could get like 50 cents an hour more because they had that. And smiling and joking aside, one girl who had taken the class actually did save a baby's life because of that. So she knew exactly what to do, who to call, in what order, what to do with the baby until paramedics got there, and whatever actually she did, and she was acknowledged by the town council and the whole thing. She did save a life because of it. So that's an anecdote.
Very good. Excuse me. Yes, Don.
Yeah, if I may, just coming back to these 2 sick cats I adopted. So it's one thing to argue about the details of the law, and it's another to find out that somebody has dumped 2 sick cats and you've just taken them on with all the barf and diarrhea and problems that are going to go on, and you know, the vet bills, the whole thing. So you know, it's taken a lot of interrogation to myself. You know, I didn't expect this. The other guy called the fast one. I have a choice though, and I think the choice comes back to what we're reading here. And I noticed it in one verse about where there's a problem, then the 2 parties take an oath to God, and it's resolved through that channel. But in this case, it's just me who has to make this decision. And I don't know that what we're reading now really has a bearing on that, except the personal sense of responsibility. I don't think there's anything I'm reading here that would give me guidance as to what to do, except how I feel about it. The other thing, if I may, one more quick thing. During the week, I went back and reread the Code of Hammurabi, and I'm matching it verse for verse with in Exodus. You know, it's the same stuff. It's almost identical. Like 250 verses versus maybe 200 verses, and Hammurabi was 200 years earlier.
Yes.
But he based it on the commandment from his god Enlil and Enlil's envoy Marduk. But you know, the law is the same for both.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. You'll see commentary to that.
Did you say Joanne? Okay.
Very, very good. Any other very good point, Don? Yes, Joanne.
Well, I grew up on a farm, and we had lots and lots of animals. And when I was probably 6 or 7, one of the animals, a sheep, had twins. And because the mother sheep didn't have enough milk, etc., I was given the baby boy sheep named Billy, and I had to feed that child. I had to feed him twice a day, etc. And I also knew, though, when he became 3 months old or whatever, he was sent to market, and that was money for the family. So there is a great responsibility, I think, for your animals. You love them, you name them, and you do what is necessary.
That's right.
It's a different way of looking at them, maybe.
There are a lot of different approaches, but Rabbi, we went through the Exodus 22 verses 9 through 12, and we were talking about responsibility with relationship to animals, plants, things. And I brought into it that this may also be here for us to have a deeper meaning of this, looking at as among human beings, how we have to accept responsibility for one another, because that comes up very shortly in our reading, and I think it's a very important concept. That if we can, we have treasured possessions, we take care of animals, we take it with either pets or on a farm, we take care of our crops, we appreciate flowers, we do gardening, and we treat them with loving care. But as an extension, this also maybe is placed in this situation. We have read about slaves, we have read about women. We're going to read more about women too, that we have a responsibility to humanity as well.
Sure.
That it's not just everything else. It's not property. And by the way, when God looks at this, we not all of these things and all of these animals, all of the land and all of us belong to him with a capital H. If that's one of the messages, if we think of it in Torah.
Well,
And so we are a little above the animals, a little below the angels, and he wants us to assume that responsibility towards everything.
well, when you talk about the responsibility with us, with human beings, you see it really in many areas of life. The food banks, by giving to food banks, by charity to
Yes.
places where medical science needs money to continue their work to cure people. I mean, it's all around us. It's all over.
Sure. So I don't know if there are, any other ideas besides Don and a few people have mentioned this, but I think it's the placement of this portion is an extension of what has preceded and what we're going to be very shortly be reading, that what Don was alluding to. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, if somebody would like to read verses 13 and 14.
I can do that.
Okay. Please.
And if a
David.
man borrow aught of his neighbor, and it be hurt, or if it dies, the owner thereof not being with it, he shall surely make restitution. If the owner thereof be with it, he shall not make it good. If it be a hireling, he loseth his hire. And if a
Okay,
man entice,
that's it. Those two verses. So what about this? You're borrowing the animal, not adopting like in Don's situation. Okay. One is you're caring for it, but now you're borrowing it for some task or some purpose. Okay.
Well,
And even then the third situation, if you're renting it or leasing it,
Mm-hmm. That's right.
one is just borrowing, and then the next one is if there's a monetary agreement.
Right. So what are your opinions about that? Well, suppose you borrow the animal and it dies. Okay. And let's say the owner knows that the animal is ill. Don has mentioned has alluded to that. Is it your total responsibility then, since you've borrowed the animal? Or if the owner knew that, didn't
Well,
know?
if you borrowed the animal,
Mhm.
I would assume that there was some discussion between the person who owns the animal and the one who's borrowing it. And it's stated, look, this animal is sick, so take great care with the animal. And so therefore, if it's sick and you can demonstrate that you did everything you could, you took it to a vet and it dies under those circumstances, I don't think that you're responsible.
Suppose you didn't know.
If you did
Suppose
not
he
know,
did, the loaner did not tell you.
well, then it's the loaner's responsibility because he did not he passed on the animal, but not the information. And you did everything, you saw it was sick. And if you did take it to a vet, then I don't think you're responsible. Actually, the responsibility would fall, I think, on the person who gave the animal and knew it was sick, but didn't give that information. So there can be a case made both ways, I think.
Sure. Don, please.
Yeah, we can get into a lot of amateur lawyering here, but the assumption underlying all of this discussion is about individual property rights. The individual has title to the animal, to whatever it is was borrowed. And it's an assumption that's never actually stated out loud. So last week I asked, well, what about in a commune in Israel? You know, there are no individual property rights. So if somebody takes the communal tractor and runs it into a ditch and bends an axle, then the community takes up the problem. And now we have, in place of that, today we have insurance. So if you loan somebody your car and they crash it, we don't get into the laws in Exodus. We submit an insurance claim, and that's a way to socially take care of damage and injury. So what we're seeing here are, I think, is the origins of individual property rights. And once you have title to something, what happens if somebody damages your property?
Okay. Which dovetails into our next, any other comments before we read on? Because that dovetails into what we're about to read. Okay. Think about what you just said, Don, as you hear it being read, verses 15 and 16.
And if a man entice
Okay, David, that's fine, or Michael, whoever.
and if a man entice a virgin that is not betrothed and lie with her, he shall surely pay a dowry for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuse to give her unto him, he shall pay money according to the dowry of virgin.
Okay. So what do you think here? Any comments?
I think that society is advanced in a way beyond this particular law, because this law mentions nothing about the rights and feelings of the woman. And I think that nowadays we now have laws that address that, which didn't seem to be in Exodus.
Okay, very, very well put. Yes, Amy.
You know, the thing that troubles me about this is the same issue I had with the 30 shekels for, what value do you put on a person's life? How do you make restitution for something so valuable as a woman's virginity when it means everything in that society for her future, her ability to marry, have children, and all of that? And the thing that really interests me, I've traveled extensively through the United Arab Emirates. And if you're driving a car, and they drive very, very fast, 80, 100 miles an hour, doing through main streets, if you hit a pedestrian, you owe the family blood money. If you killed that person. However, if that person is a Pakistani, nobody cares. Nothing is done. There's no responsibility because they're in a different class. They really have no value in that society. And I've always wondered how you put a value to some intrinsic items, things that you just can't value.
Very interesting. Any comments about what Amy just said? Because it's a slightly different take from what we're going to read very shortly. Yes, Rabbi and also Suzanne.
Well,
go ahead, Rabbi.
To Amy's question is don't, and again, like Don was saying, we're amateur lawyers, but don't juries do that all the time? Don't they assign a particular value if there was a murder, or if there was some kind of liability for the loss of a limb on up to the loss of a life? So it's arbitrary, and it can be affected by many factors. Thankfully, we live in a country where what you're describing about Pakistanis is not the case anymore. Used to be, but it's not the case anymore. We're advancing somewhat. But back to the text, this is included here at a time um, when we see that phrase "seduces a virgin" kind of thing, and again, given the English, but the reference is that's just one of the ways sexual intercourse is one of the ways that a man could acquire a bride. And it's a polygamous society.
Yes.
So he could do that with more than one woman. But either through sexual intercourse, or through paying specifically the bride price, paying the dowry, or by mutual agreement between the two of them. There were all these different possibilities for how a marriage, there was no ceremony, a marriage could take place. Up until that point, she was back to a word we were using before, she was the responsibility of her father. A ketubah, if you ever read the traditional text of a ketubah, it specifically has to be written whether the bride is coming into this marriage from mibeit aviha, from her father's house, or on her own if she was a widow or a divorcee. So it even to this day, the text of the ketubah still says that. So this is, it's not the way that we approach things today, but it's certainly within the frame of reference of the way that they approached marriage, and what would happen with to the woman who had been married, or if the father disagreed and didn't want her to have that new relationship.
Very good. Yeah, Suzanne and then Don.
I look at this as saying that a guy can't just have fun with a girl and then forget all about her. If he's gonna have his fun, so to speak, then he's gonna be responsible. And so I look at this as like a good thing. I mean, she might not want to marry him, but on the other hand, he does have responsibilities. It's just fun and games.
No matter how many wives he has.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was addressed in our preceding readings, that he still has a responsibility to his former, not former, but the older wife. He still has a full sense of responsibility to honor her. Yes, very good points. Yes, Don.
Yeah, I think too, Marty, we should remember that this is a hierarchical society. So, you've got royalty, priests at the top, and at the bottom you have slaves who are just property. And then in between, commoners, and below that, women. So even the American Declaration of Independence, which declares all men are created equal, specifies men, not women. So to Amy's point,
I'll be back.
Yeah.
We've got to be careful not imposing what we now believe about equality, because it didn't apply then. And in fact, even now we talk, if women go to court, there's a tendency to blame the victim. At that time, because women weren't real people, they couldn't even be victims. I don't think they just had to accept what was imposed. I always have to catch myself, or try to think what it was like then, not what we think now.
In some ways we've come a long way, and in others we have not. But it's true. It's a good point that you're making. Yes, Rabbi.
So in the Hebrew, in verse 16, the verb that I think most of us see as translated as refuses. Okay, if the father refuses is the way that we see the translations. But the Hebrew is actually an interesting construction, which with the verb being doubled. And so the commentators jump in immediately. Well, why is the verb doubled? And they give basically two answers. One is that she has to refuse as well as the father. Okay, because it says if the verb refuse twice, and the other is as more of an emphatic refusal, which means that the father has to in his refusal has to be public, and indeed even accusing the man of having, today we would probably use the word rape, and whatever. So it's interesting the way that the commentators try to add a little bit of again what we're talking about of understanding responsibility one human being to another, when and making it a little bit different.
Good point. Good point. Yes, Michael.
I think in the there's something about this in a super Orthodox that some rabbis say, "Thank God I wasn't made a woman," or something to that effect. And so it goes pretty deep.
That's in the morning. That's in the morning blessings. It's not just rabbis.
Not just rabbis.
No.
But
Anyone who is davening or praying with an Orthodox prayer book in the morning blessings.
Right.
Thank you, God, for not making me a woman.
And what is that all about?
What is that all? Again, how many hours do you want to go into the discussion? But the editors of the prayer books, the way that we have them, reflecting a point of view of that there were significant differences between men and women, and The women were allowed to use the prayer book and recite the prayers, but they weren't obligated to. Men were. Most of the more modern prayer books, let's say in the last 60, 70 years, change the wording of that from thanking God for creating me a man into thanking God for creating me as a Jew, or just creating me as a human being. So there's been an evolution there, but the traditional prayer book specifically says, you know, along with thank you God for creating me with all the sphincters and valves and openings and closings that work correctly, also thank you for making me a man. Mainly, you know, probably because it's painful to be a woman. And I'll leave it at that.
That is a good comment. Very interesting. Any other discussion? Well, I'm sure we could come up with others, but let's read on just verse 17. I'll read that. You shall not tolerate a sorceress. And I will add to that, there's comment on this. It was most likely at that time a woman who would be dealing in witchcraft. Okay, and it was other than that, we have to assume that the practice, as it says in Plout, Rabbi Plout says, the practitioner was most likely a woman at that time. Yes, okay, Don and Rabbi both had their hands up
Go ahead,
simultaneously.
Don. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I'm going to Rabbi Norm on this one. I'm just going to ask what
Okay,
the Hebrew was for that.
yes,
Well, that's what I was going to point out.
yes,
All of the English and the way that we would normally interpret it seems like it's a death sentence. Okay,
right.
but that's not, at least and that's the way that the Pilgrims understood it, and the Salem witch trials and whatever, quoting the Bible. But the Hebrew, and indeed most of the traditional commentators say you shall not provide a livelihood to a witch, a sorceress, whatever. I mean, later on in the Torah, we'll encounter a number of places where you don't follow false prophets, and those who try to predict the future and things like that. So in that same context, and the Hebrew is definitely different than like we'll see it in the next sentence. Shall surely die, shall surely suffer, be stoned to death, or whatever it was. This is more of do not provide a livelihood. In other words, do not support someone who has that professional calling.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Amy.
This is a question for Rabbi. I've long wondered, after reading the prophets in the Bible, how does one discern between a false prophet and a true prophet?
Well, we encountered it in the Torah portion. It was either last week or the week before, so we could wait for 2 more years, or 3-4 more years until we actually get there in Deuteronomy. It's a fascinating question, Amy. The traditional answer is just in whether or not what the prophet talked about, whether or not it came true. Okay, so sometimes you just can't tell at the time when you're listening to the message if it's true or not, if it's a actual message from God. Okay. The other I guess, counsel that that would be given is, um, uh, how would I put this? I'm trying to translate. There's a pithy phrase in Aramaic. The closest would be common sense. You know, if the message is telling you something that doesn't make sense, right? Then it's I wouldn't necessarily say likely, but it's strongly possible that the prophet has ulterior motives. That's prophet with a small p. All right, the prophet has ulterior motives. Certainly, if that messenger, I guess, rather than messenger, prophet or speaker is trying to persuade you away from God, our God, right, into believing something else, then the likelihood, again, not definite, but the likelihood is that that's not a viable prophet or prophecy from the Jewish point of view. I guess that's how I would start the answers to the question. It is certainly, yeah, you're not the first to ask that question through the generations.
If we go from this portion to almost a century, well, more than a century, it's almost 1,000 years later, isn't there a rabbi that convinces people or tries to convince people that he is a Messiah, but winds up trying to convert them to Islam?
Oh, several.
That's right.
Several. There was just a story in some of the Israeli and Jewish media in the last month or so about a rabbi in Peru who was doing the same thing, and he was convincing people to convert to Judaism, follow him, move to the Holy Land, which they did. There were several hundred who followed him and moved to Israel, and then he converted. He was claiming to be the Messiah, whatever, and then converted. So yes, there have been situations like that.
Yeah.
Amy, if you're looking, if here's a little book. I don't know if it's in the temple library, but you may be able to find it. And I'm trying to remember the exact name of it. The author is one of my Bible professors who has passed away, Sheldon Blank, Blank. It's a very small little volume, but he uses the story of Jonah, appropriate for Yom Kippur. He uses the story of Jonah to explain what really constitutes a viable, valid, authentic Jewish prophet. Okay, it may be something like Understanding the Prophets or something like that, but it's a small little volume. Probably takes 2 hours to read the entire thing. But Sheldon Blank is the author.
Okay. Yeah, that was an interesting question because there are lots of times when I read this, it reminded me of something that we're going to read about the ephod and the Urim and Thummim.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't this a form of divination?
Mm-hmm.
So if it is expressed here in Torah, is there a difference between one and also the story of Joseph? He's considered that he can divine dreams. Okay, so this comes up periodically. How do we separate one kind of divination from another? from the sense, the true divination versus divination that was sanctioned by Torah and like that. How do we tell the difference? I don't know the right answer.
A lot of it is just based on, I think, on the trust that we might have in who's bringing the message.
Okay. And that can be difficult.
Of course.
And that dovetails into what you were talking about. That is a book that I'm going to have to look up. By the way, Rabbi, while we're speaking of recommendations of books, it took me all this time to read one commentary about Rosenzweig.
Yeah, okay.
And it, as well as reading through his philosophy, very, very difficult to follow until the very last part of the book. It makes more sense, but it's taken me all this time to try to get through this.
Okay.
I think he was trying to say something similar to our discussion here. How do we know when somebody is trying to say, it gets that aha moment? How do we know that it is a true revelation from God or some other devious person eventually we can find out there is an ulterior motive, but it takes time to figure that out. And how do we, when somebody is atoning, how do we know that they are completely changing their way? It requires time for us to see that. Only the individual knows if they have truly atoned, or if they have an ulterior motive, saying that they're a prophet. Only they know, but everyone around them may come to their support and believe in that person. So how do we know? And I can only come up with the test of time.
That's right.
That's right. And so, looking at all of these writings and like that, it does have to raise some different types of questions. And but here we understand God will know. And by the way, we still do that. We have the fear of God put into us in every courtroom when you have to place your hand on a Bible. Okay, it's hoping you have that fear. But what about the atheist? What about and there are Jews that are atheists, but what about the atheist when he swears on that Bible?
Doesn't have to.
Doesn't have to. That's right. Today.
Right.
That's right. So it becomes an important it just is an important consideration. We have to put all of this together to make it work somehow. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So I'm going to take the liberty of reading verse 18. Whoever lies with a beast shall be put to death. Any comments about that? Yes, Amy.
Do people ever do that?
Supposedly. Yeah. It's
And it wouldn't even be included in the text if
it didn't happen.
Wasn't known, right?
That's right. So there's commentary that
or as one of my students was says, you can't make it a no if it wasn't a yes to somebody.
That's right. That's a good way of looking at it. But but part of the commentary is, why would it be such a severe punishment? Okay, and in some cases, it was also implied the animal would be put to death.
Right.
By the way, we still did, I'm going to extend that. Think of situations when human beings do something to animals, okay, and the animal reacts and bites him back or her back, bites someone else or whatever. And we still punish the person for doing that, but the animal is still killed. When somebody stupidly puts their hand into a lion's cage and the lion, attacks them, right? The lion is also killed. We do this. Is that justice? Yes, Don.
Well, sexuality and taxes are the two sacred topics in every civilization. So, that's every civilization focuses on sex. And the protocols and restrictions and that's the basis of getting more people. So it's not surprising. I don't think it's surprising to find that in the biblical law.
Okay. Yes, Amy.
Why is the animal put to death? The animal that's been violated or sexually, or the animal that has been mistreated and then lashes out to try and stop the abuse. Why?
I do not know the answer to that. That's why I raised the question that way. What about the poor animal?
Yeah, exactly.
Is this going to dovetail in any way to when you work animals of different types? I think the example in Torah is the ox and the ass. Okay, the mule. You don't want to do that. They're two different animals. They have totally different structure. Their bodies are different. They have different purposes also. Does this have anything to do with that as well? That you're having potential contamination of society. They will be fornicating with animals instead of each other because it's easier to do that. If it's forbidden to just go around anywhere doing it with women, men can still do it with an animal. And so this is also saying somewhat, you shouldn't even do it with the animals. But why would we want to kill the animal? Yes, Don.
Well, I would guess that there was some fear of what the result would be. The copulation of a human being and an animal. I mean, there was, the separation of species and compatibility of species. That, as far as I know, that was not known at the time, and so there must have been some fear about what we might get now.
Well,
So,
possible. Yes, Grace.
I'm gonna kind of piggyback off what Don just mentioned. I think that the animal has been tarnished. If an animal has been sexually abused by a male, and this is why what I think is possibly the rationale behind the, putting the animal to death as well, is when people, it's really crazy in the animal world, especially with canines and horses and, artificial insemination and just all the things that we do with science today. If a female dog is accidentally bred by a roaming dog that is not of the same breed, that can carry over 3 litters later. So it's
Mhm.
tarnished.
That's right.
It's tarnished, and that's what I'm thinking is they're going to put the animal to death because now it's been tarnished, and for fear of what that copulation might, involve or happen. So that's the only reason I can think of. There's probably plenty of, ideas around that, but I think that's kind of piggybacking off what Don just shared. It's like, it's stupid and crazy and very unusual to begin with. But I love what Rabbi shared earlier, that, there wouldn't be a law about it, a no if there wasn't a yes prior to that.
That's right.
So that really jumped out at me. Thank you for sharing that, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yes, Rabbi. Oh, I think you wanted to say something, and then
I'm sorry, somebody else?
Is that a Wendy hand?
It's a David hand.
A David hand.
But this is kind of interesting because I remember as a child getting to this lying with a beast thing. And I was told that this was a different time. And in the time when the Israelites were in the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years, one of the problems was this. It is not a problem now, except I'm coming from the other point of view, because we used to have a beagle who would climb on other people's bodies, and they call it humping, I think, but that's coming from the animal.
Yeah.
And usually when that happens, you just kind of pet the animal and it's done with. But those were meant for a different time, I think.
Okay. Before I call on the rabbi, I have to leave, as I had mentioned earlier. But I want to leave everyone with a thought. I've been reading a few articles that have come up in different science journals. I know we have been doing crossbreeding for ages, and that we do that with plants. And in some cases, we select animals so that we get different breeds for different purposes, things like that. However, with genetic engineering, they are now taking the genes from one type of animal and crossing them with another to give the other animal some improvement in whether it's bone structure, if muscles function, things like that. They can do it in the laboratory. Okay. And what first came to mind was Boys of Brazil.
Mhm.
Okay. So I'm going to leave you with that. And so I'm going to sign out. And if somebody would care to just take care of whoever raises a hand and things like that, I would appreciate it. I know Grace has her hand up, and the rabbi was going to say something. Shabbat shalom, and see you
Shabbat
next
shalom,
week.
Marty.
Take care.
Good
Bye-bye.
service.
Take care. Thanks. Regards
Shabbat
to Sue.
shalom.
I have to say there are two things, and then I actually have to leave also. But two things. One, the traditional comment and explanation of why the beast a behemoth, a beast of burden, an animal who had been violated this way, had to be put to death. The traditional answer was because that animal might be angry, revengeful when any other human being, came close to it. Okay, and would lash out, and so it was precautionary as opposed to certainly not a punishment. The other thing, again, that's not necessarily clear from the English, but the distinction is there in the Hebrew. This could be a male or a female, a man or a woman who lies with an animal. Okay. Most of the other paragraphs in this whole context start with if a man does something, if a man does something, if a man does something. This one specifically in verse 18 says anyone who does. So it could be male or female. Again, acknowledging something that must have been happening. It may not have been that prevalent, but it must have happened, and they needed to find a response to it. So I'm also going to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. I don't know if I can join next week. I'm going to be in Michigan for a family bar mitzvah, and I'm not sure how the timing would work out. I will have a computer with me, so hopefully I'll be able to join for part of the day anyway. But wish you all very well. Thanks. Shabbat Shalom.
Well,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, everybody, you can't see me because I'm over here at the side. I'm at Joanne's. I have a doctor's appointment. I have to pack up and walk down to my house and do my lovely stuff. So since there's nobody else here, I mean, unless somebody else wants to take charge, how about if we just end early today and we'll pick this up next week? Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
yeah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Pardon me?
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom,
Shabbat shalom.
everybody. I'll see you next week.
Ruth Ann,
Yeah?
this is Amy. I will not be here next week. I'll be in Chicago at a grandson's wedding.
Oh, mazel tov.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. See everybody else next week.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.